John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. Here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Getting ready to take a look at the game last night. The Eagles have a lot of news around them today that we have not been able to get into. You know, when the Sixers make noise, when they have a story, it typically is the tip of the iceberg, and it knocks everything else off. And that Fultz story was that big. But the Eagles have a lot to get into. And that game last night, what did you think of the game last night? Did you guys watch? I was at the Sixers game, and I said I'm going to go to the Sixers game. And my whole reasoning was, because I knew this game was last night, was at least I will be able to watch the second half of the game on my drive home, and that will make my drive home less, that 1 hour drive.
Painstaking.
Yeah, so I enjoyed. In fact, I got home. The game was still 7 minutes left in the game, and I got to be honest with you, I'm not a fan of this game last night was akin to when everybody watched that World Series game between the Cubs and the Indians, and we're like, this was a great game. And I'm like, it was an entertaining game. But 12-11 is a poorly played game.
I personally think it was the most entertaining game I've ever watched.
Entertaining game.
Yes.
I'm not knocking
the most entertaining game I've ever watched.
I'm not knocking the entertainment value of that game. But to suggest it was a well-played game, there was penalties at the yin-yang.
Yeah, that was part of the intensity of it, is the penalties, and there was defensive plays, lead changes. Man, I couldn't get enough of that. I didn't want it to end.
I enjoyed it.
They created
it wasn't a well-played game.
No, I'm not debating you with it. I'm just putting my 2 cents in with it.
They created a super team of referees.
Which was a ridiculous idea.
Exactly, and that led to an even more poorly called or poorly officiated game. The rules don't lend this to be a 10-3 showdown anymore.
No.
So I can't hold guys accountable on defense all the time if they're giving up a lot of points and just default to say, hey, it was a poorly executed game on defense. I think both teams' offenses are capable of doing special things. I didn't have a problem with it.
No, I didn't have a problem with it. I just was saying a game that's 54-51 at the end of the day, you're not like, hey, that was a very well-played defensive.
Not defensive, but it's a well-played game overall.
Which, absolutely. Think about that. There was more
points to end the game.
There was more points scored in that game last night than I think the Eagles have scored since the Giant game.
All right, let me ask you this. How many points were scored last night? 104?
105.
105. How many points on the season so far for Markelle Fultz total?
Well, he's got,
he has more than 100.
Nah, I don't think so. He's only played
Don't you have his stats?
Games.
I did have him up. I'll pull him back.
All right, let's bring John into the conversation
he was
now.
the whole time?
Get the Eagles and NFL news here. John, I know you're a defense guy, right? So last night's game, you probably were one of those guys that were on that fence of it was an entertaining game, but not the most well.
155 points,
155 points, folks. So you're probably on the side that was a entertaining game, but maybe not the best played game.
Yeah, exactly. That's what people want today. So you saw the hyperbole all over social media. It's far from the greatest game ever played, but it was certainly entertaining. And there were superstars all over the field. One of them, one of the most high-profile people on the field, unfortunately, was Clete Blakeman, though. That was an issue, number one, as that was an awfully officiated game. And then the second part, and this has been a theme throughout the NFL, as good as Patrick Mahomes has been, as good as Jared Goff has been, man, there are blown coverages all over the place, constantly. And one of the things I've been impressed with Jared Goff specifically is the tight window throws he's been making all season. He didn't have any because guys were just wide open. So it depends the way you look at it. But, hey, that's what people want, and that's what excites them. And that's the first time a team scored 50 points and lost a game in the NFL. And somehow the Chiefs scored 51. Think about this, guys. They scored 51 points, and they turned it over 5 times.
Right.
I don't even know how you do that.
Yeah. Like I'm certainly not typically in the get off my lawn crowd.
I don't know about that.
What?
You teeter on that line. You venture into that line. I see you every now and again on the porch, yelling, shaking your fist at a cloud.
I don't know about this.
At a cloud.
But overall, let me ask you.
You know, as somebody who's at that age where people immediately go to, I find it ironic because, Mike and I have had it out about the process, and people accuse me of shaking my fist at a cloud, and I like defense in the NFL. But, I always say there's not a 25-year-old in existence that lives to be, let's say, 35 or 45 and thinks they knew more at 25. So, experience counts for something in that people of a certain age have already been there. But I do recognize, as I said, which I think is an open mind, this is what the majority of people want. And this is the way the NFL has gone, because they're giving the people what they want.
Now, Plato would disagree with you, though, John. As you know, you become wiser in your older age because you're more aware of the fact that you know less.
Well, but
Mr. Sword of Damocles, take that.
That is the key to it all. As I said, we all know. We all think we know it all at when we're young, and we all grow to an age where we go, God, how dumb were we back then? That's just life.
All right, so what's Mike Groh's excuse? Because he's getting older, but my goodness, I don't know if
it's a sliding scale. It's a sliding scale.
Fair enough.
I was going to slide. There are always really intelligent people at any age, but they're always going to learn more as they go on. But if you got a big head start at 25, well, you're going to be smarter than a 45-year-old idiot. The point is, you at 25, wherever your sliding scale is, you're going to grow and you're going to learn more as the years pass.
Well, Mike Groh is going to be 47 December 19th of this year, and I don't want to call him an idiot by any means, but my goodness, John, I don't think I've ever heard any coach or coordinator in the history of my 39 years on this planet following the Philadelphia Eagles openly admit to not knowing how to do his job like Mike Groh did earlier today, saying that it's now been 3 weeks and he doesn't know how to integrate Golden Tate, who, correct me if I'm wrong, has been one of the most productive wide receivers in the NFL over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, today I crossed over. I wrote about this, I think, last week in 973ESPN.com, and that Mike Groh is shaping up to be the scapegoat for all of this if things continue to go in a negative direction. Today was the tipping point. Today was where I said, this guy's not cut out for Philadelphia. He can't handle it. It's a difficult media environment. And you're going to have to handle some issues. And, I'm never a fan of people who think coaches are good because of the way they handle themselves on the podium. But to me, it indicates bigger problems. And I just don't think he's cut out for this job. I really don't.
Well, he mentions basically that he's having a hard time figuring out a way. I got a way. How about if you're having a problem figuring out it with him, replace Aguilar and put him in the Aguilar spot?
Well, that's what I've been saying. I've
never designed a play in my life. I could figure that out.
You never designed a play?
They're trying not to step on the toes of Nelson Aguilar, and I don't understand it. He's not a good enough player to worry about. If he were a good enough player, you wouldn't have traded for Golden Tate. So I don't understand this hemming and hawing, which comes obviously from this coaching staff, but also the fan base as well, who makes Nelson Aguilar to be more than he is. He had a great year last year. It was a great comeback year. He kind of saved his career. Now he's heading in a backward direction again. It's not as bad as his first 2 seasons, right. But he's not a good enough player to be worried about his feelings.
Right. The guy that they should have a problem figuring out how to fit in is him. If you're saying, all right, we got Golden Tate, we're going to put him into the Aguilar spot. Now I'm having some problems figuring out what to do with Aguilar. I think we're less giving you criticism. You got this guy for 7 games who was supposed to be a major upgrade, and you have not been able to figure out how to use him. I think it's preposterous to come out and admit that, number one. And number two, not figure out how to use him at this point.
But is it because of Aguilar, or is it because they just haven't done a good enough job, regardless of why they haven't got him on the field? Not just because, oh, we don't want to upset Aguilar. It's just because we haven't been able to do it, simply enough.
Well, and it starts to make you think there might be a little disconnect between Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas, who think Nelson Aguilar isn't good enough and got an upgrade, and they're right, and the coaching staff might have a different opinion and might still value Nelson Aguilar. That's the only thing I can come up with, because it's not hard, and the Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans have proved it with Amari Cooper and Demaryius Thomas, respectively. You can get guys on the field if you want to get them on the field. So why the Eagles are dragging their feet, I have no idea.
Yeah, the whole look, he's here. He's been here for 3 weeks. I mean, I get it. He's not going to know the whole playbook, but I'm sure that there's stuff that this guy could get in there and have an impact. And you've talked about it's criminal, and for 2 games he's been a waste.
Yeah, especially when he's a pending free agent, and he's going to get a lot of money, and you might not be able to re-sign him, and he gave up a 3rd-round pick. And, oh, by the way, if you keep going in a negative direction, that 3rd-round pick is going to be pretty valuable. If you go to the Super Bowl again, which is pie in the sky, but obviously it's not as valuable. I think to give up that kind of premium pick for a player you're not going to use, that's a bad trade. And I'm sure that's not what Howie Roseman envisioned when he pulled the trigger, and it certainly looked good on paper. It hasn't worked out that way.
Yeah, I don't know at what point, if it hasn't happened already, John, does somebody who was involved in making that trade, a la Roseman Douglas, step over a line to the people involved in now making sure that new piece works, a la Doug Peterson, Mike Groh, and say, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, I would imagine.
Like Joe Douglas, John, would be that guy, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, Howie still runs the show.
True, but I'm saying like more of the football, and I hate to use this term because it's not applicable 99% of the time, but more of the football guy, if you will. But you're right, no, let's scrap that. You're right. Howie's the guy to do that.
Yeah, Howie's the guy that's got to say, I'm going to put my foot down, and we got this guy for a reason. And generally, I mean, this marriage has worked because both sides have accepted what Chip Kelly could never accept, and that's the offseason is for Roseman and Douglas. They build the roster, and they hand the roster over to Doug Peterson, who coaches it. And it's worked pretty darn well to this point. This is when you get in season, and last year people had questions. The running game was working very well, and people questioned whether Doug really wanted to add Jay Ajayi, but he utilized him. When you get in season and you make a high-profile move, and I would argue that Tate's even more high-profile than that, as evidenced by what they gave up for him. Yeah, I mean, maybe Howie does have to step in and say, look, this is my ship, and we got him for a reason. He's got to be on the field.
I know Jernigan off the NFI today, correct? Does that would you anticipate that he will now be ready to play on Sunday?
Yes, that's a clear indication that they expect him. I always have to say with this team, barring any setbacks. But the fact that they activated him, put him on the 53-man roster, indicates they want him to play this weekend. And that's a big sort of late-season pickup, if you want to look at it that way, because one of the issues has been the rotation next to Fletcher Cox on the interior. And Tim's a really good player. We'll have to see. You know, he didn't have an off season, obviously. He's been working his way back. There's going to be some rust, I would imagine. But that's certainly a better player than you could get off the scrap heap in the street, because you think about T.Y. McGill, who they waived, Trevon Hester, Bruce Hector. These are the type of names they've been playing.
John, obviously this is a big week for them, and they'll start at it next week. But where in your mind do they compare to this Giants team? Because the last time they played the Giants, it was almost like, well, they're playing the Giants. The Giants have now won a couple of games in a row. They seemingly have, tighten some things up. Do you think these two teams are on comparable levels right now?
Well, some people would argue that the Giants have far better weapons on the offensive side of the football. It's kind of hard to argue now with Evan Ingram back. If you think about that talent with Odell Beckham and Ingram and Saquon Barkley, that's pretty good. The issue with the Giants remains the quarterback. They've done some things a little bit better. And I think the Eagles are, at this stage, are an unknown because, look, they can't win if they have to play Cre'Von LeBlanc and Chandon Sullivan and players like that at cornerback. Devontae Ballsby is another. They simply can't win with those guys out there. So we have to wait and see how this week progresses. If Jalen Mills is able to get back, if Avonte Maddox, who I saw in the locker room and amazingly was moving pretty well, if he can play. Didn't see Rasul Douglas today. He's been listed as day-to-day. Those guys aren't great, but they need them out there. And then I think if they're out there, I think the Eagles are a better team and certainly a better team at home.
John, what are the Eagles working on this week? Like when they get into the facility today and the rest of the week, I mean, what are they even looking at that film from Sunday? I mean, we haven't dealt with a loss like this to this magnitude since 2005 when McMahon was quarterback and they lost to the Seahawks 42-0. We've seen that everywhere since Sunday. But, how do they now shift gears and prepare for this Giants team? And what do they need to be working on this week to try and get a win here Sunday?
Yeah, in fact, I argued they should just throw this out, not even bother with the film. You're not going to learn anything from it. It's just an outlier. But they did watch, and Malcolm Jenkins talked about it today and said some pretty incendiary things about not liking the demeanor of the team. But so they did watch it. I'm not sure what they're going to learn from it other than their 6th, 7th, and 8th corners can't play at all. And that Drew Brees is really good, and Michael Thomas is really good, and Alvin Kamara is really good. We all knew that. So I kind of advocate turning the page. And, hey, guys, think about this. If the Cowboys beat the Redskins on Thanksgiving, which I think is logical, it's a home game. The Redskins don't have their starting quarterback. Then the Cowboys have the Saints next. Well, the Saints are going to beat the Cowboys. I think we could all agree on that. If that happens, all of a sudden the Eagles play the Giants at home, the Redskins at home. If they win those 2 games, they go into Dallas, and they're playing for first place. So this is hardly over. In fact, you could argue that scenario just laid out is a pretty logical scenario.
Right. So, who do you, if you're an Eagle fan, you're rooting for Dallas, right?
Yes.
Yes. Which is very tough for Eagles fans. But they should be rooting for Dallas because, as I said, the Saints are coming up right behind them, and I find it very hard to believe the Cowboys will be in that football game. And then, as I said, you have the Eagles' consecutive home games against the Giants and Redskins where they will be favored in both games.
Yeah, anybody who has a problem rooting for Dallas based on this situation is an idiot. Let me ask you this question. I'm curious to get, and it's a hypothetical, I know that, but I think the general conversation has been Jim Schwartz is an idiot, Jim Schwartz doesn't know what he's doing, and Jim Schwartz is in over his head, he's not changing, he's all these things that have been attached to him. But the football reality of it, and I appeal to you here, the football mind, is, and this is my gut, the majority of people in the NFL, maybe not Eagles fans, but NFL will see a defense that was totally decimated by injury and still producing for the most part up until like the last week or so at a high clip. What I'm getting to is I wouldn't be shocked at all if at the end of the year Jim Schwartz got a job offer.
A head coach?
Well,
yes.
Jim's problem is the league in general.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody's going to want. I don't think anybody's going to want a defensive mind. We just saw last night. It's going to be tough to sell a defensive guy in this environment. Everybody wants the next Sean McVay, or everybody wants the next guy off the Andy Reid tree.
We still see guys like
Matt
Patricia.
Nagy's Coach of the Year.
No, I understand, John.
Patricia hasn't done anything of success, though.
But he still got the job, and he isn't the first Belichickian disciple. I get it, to get a job based off that. But I'm not saying
John's about the Lions.
Listen,
people want to copycat the Lions.
Oh, yes, but hold on. All it takes is one. All it takes is one bad team to make one bad decision.
Who once hired Jim Schwartz?
There you go. So I'm not saying it's Detroit, but it could be another team. And listen, I'm not saying that John is wrong with his response to my question. What I'm saying, though, is that there's enough that I can look at and say maybe it's an opening of a guy who had a really good defense. And again, I don't think that if you are a head coach away from winning a Super Bowl, you're in a position to say, well, Jim Schwartz is our guy. But if it's a team going nowhere that looks and says we need a breath of fresh air, we can match Jim Schwartz with a former quarterbacks coach who can now be the OC. I don't know. All I'm saying, John, is that I would not be shocked.
It could happen. I mean, every year I think it's getting more and more difficult as we move forward for defensive guys. I mean, Matt Patricia got a job. So it does happen, although I think as we continue to go the direction we're going in, it's going to be less and less likely. More hurdles are put in place of those guys. But if you're asking if Jim Schwartz is well respected in this league, yeah, I keep telling people he's a top 5 defensive coordinator by reputation in this league. And people here, I say it all the time, get very myopic. Mm-hmm. Look at Wade Phillips. Look at that reputation as a defensive mind. Well, he's given up 51 points.
Right.
It is hard to play defense against certain teams, and we all know who they are, the Saints being one of them, and it becomes impossible with, again, your 6th, 7th, and 8th cornerback. I mean, I don't know what people expect, but throw any defensive name you want out there. They are not succeeding against Drew Brees with LeBlanc and Sullivan and Ballsby. They're not.
No. Ballsby. We haven't brought his name up all week. He stinks, too. All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, at JF McMullen on Twitter. Tomorrow we'll get the picks for Eagles and Giants and so much more as they get ready to prepare for New York. Big game against the Giants. Big NFC matchups back-to-back weeks. John, thanks for your time, pal.
Hey, real quick, this is for Eitan, for how we started this conversation. I'm going to break out a George Bernard Shaw for you. Youth is wasted on the young.
I love it, and I do not disagree.